In this video, we will be laying out and assembling our parts tray on cardstock. Taking a look at the schematics for our parts tray, we want to identify the total height and total width of our drawing. We can see that we have an overall width of 8 3/4 inches and an overall height of 7 3/4 inches. I'm going to be using the bottom left-hand corner of my cardstock to base this entire drawing off of. This way I will be sure that the first two sides I start with are perpendicular to each other. So I'm going to measure 8 3/4 inches from the bottom and 8 3/4 inches towards the top. I'm putting small reference lines and then I'll connect those together. Now I'm starting this with pencil in case I need to go back and erase any of my lines. My overall height is 7 3/4 inches. So again, I'm going to place some reference lines at 7 3/4 inches and connect those together also. What I am left with is an overall box that my entire drawing should fit within, because my box that I've drawn is drawn to the overall size of the part that I'm going to be building, in this case the parts tray. Next I'm going to lay out the corners. If we take a look at our original drawing, the corners measure 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. So I'm going to lay out my corners, putting reference lines at 1.5 inches. And again, I'm just using pencil and I'm drawing some light lines so that I can go back and erase them later. Let's do 1.5 inches over here, 1.5 inches over here, and I will measure my 1.5 inch corners going in the other direction as well. So now I have my overall box that my drawing needs to fit within. I have my corners laid out at 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Next I'm going to darken in several of these lines to help me differentiate my layout lines from my actual object lines on the drawing. I'm going to start by darkening in some of the edges, because I know that these lines are part of my object. At this point, I'm going to lay out some of my operational lines. These are the dashed lines that we will be actually folding our parts tray on. If we take a look at our operational number 1 line, we can see that from the left edge of the original part, there is a measurement of 1/2 inch. I'm going to identify that line on my drawing, again by placing several reference points and then connecting them together. Towards the bottom of our drawing, we also have a number 1 identified operational line. And if we take a look at our measurements, there is not a specific measurement that is identified. However, we can use measurements from other portions of the drawing. So we're going to use that first half-inch measurement and assume that there is a half-inch single hem going all the way around this object. So I'm going to again lay out a half-inch reference lines. And then I'm going to darken in those reference lines, but rather than doing a solid line, I will be doing a dashed line. This will ensure that my operational line number 1 is differentiated from my object line, which is the solid line going around my entire part. I will continue that same process for my additional number 1 operational fold lines. And then I'm going to take a look back at the original drawing. My operational number 2 and number 3 lines I've actually already drawn as part of my reference lines that I had previously put in my drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and darken those in as well, again using a dashed line. And I'm going to go ahead and identify the lines that I've drawn so I don't get confused at any point down the road. So we have 1, 1, 1, 1. And again, this is our first operation that we need to perform on our parts tray when we are assembling it together. I'm also going to darken in this little tab line. And that will actually be an object line rather than my dashed operational line. I next need to focus on the tiny tabs that are identified on our drawing with the additional measurements. Taking a look at the original drawing, I have quite a few measurements that I need to transfer over to my drawing and create some reference points. I'm going to start with the series of measurements, 1/2 inch, 5/16, 3/8, 5/16, and I'm going to transfer those reference lines onto my drawing. From the edge of our part, we're going to do a 1/2 inch. I'm going to add 5/16 to that 1/2 inch. Then we have 3/8 beyond that mark, followed by an additional 5/16. I'm going to duplicate those reference lines below. and create some light reference lines based off of those reference points. Next, I'm going to take a look at my original drawing again and put the remaining measurements, being the 1/2 inch and 1 inch measurement, to verify. So on my drawing here, put a mark at a 1/2 inch, and we can verify that from our 1/2 inch mark to the edge of our paper is an additional 1 inch. Another reference line there. And then we are able to connect our points of intersection together to create our tab. And lastly, we can darken in those tab lines. And then I'm going to identify that as number 4, which will become a spot weld. That same procedure needs to be completed for the other 3 corners. After we have laid out our entire parts tray, we will be using scissors to cut out our parts tray following the solid object lines. Taking a look at our original drawing, we can see that there are 4 different operations that we need to perform to assemble this parts tray together. The first operation is a single hem, and that is noted by the number 1 on various dashed lines that we previously drew. We also have identified these on our parts tray that we are mocking up on paper. So I'm going to create a single hem based off of each of these number 1 fold lines. And because we're just doing this on paper, we will use tape to hold everything together. Back to our drawing, we can see that the number 2 operation is a 90-degree fold. Now this number 2 line extends across the entire length of our parts tray. Don't get confused with the number 4 operation because we have not got there yet. That is for our spot weld that we will do at the end. So we're going to again fold our number 2 at 90 degrees. The little tabs here will be folded at the same time to 90 degrees. After that, we will be doing our number 3 operation, which is another 90-degree fold. Now, taking a look at our parts tray here, we have our tabs that, when folded up, need to go on the inside of our parts tray. And when we're doing this on metal, you'll have to be very careful to make sure that the tab does not collide with the side of the part. So I'm going to go ahead and fold this at 90 degrees. Now obviously it's a lot easier to do with paper than it will be with metal. Now there's a couple different ways to do this. When we fold this up, we can do it so that our tab goes in between our single hem and the side of our parts tray. That might not always work in every case. An alternative way it would be just to go to the outside of that. So I'm going to continue my process of folding up my parts tray. I've done my first 3 operations. My 4th operation is going to be a spot weld. Obviously, we are just doing this on paper as practice, so I will be spot welding it with a little bit of tape instead of the spot welder. And when completed, we have our assembled parts tray.